An organization's greatest strategic asset, its sophisticated structure, often contains the seed of its own obsolescence. This is the paradox of complexity. The very mechanism designed for problem-solving can become an unsolvable problem in itself. It is a pattern etched into history, from fallen empires to failing corporations. Now, let's open the historical ledger and analyze the economic blueprint this crisis left behind. Human societies and the corporate structures that mirror them are fundamentally problem-solving organisms. From a challenge of securing a food source to managing a global supply chain, their survival and growth depend on surmounting obstacles. The primary and most consistently successful tool for this task has always been the strategic addition of complexity. A new problem arises, and a new layer of structure is created to manage it. A new law, a specialized role, a government bureau, a corporate department. This is not a design flaw. Initially, it is the hallmark of a vibrant, adaptive system. We can formalize this relationship using the analytical framework pioneered by historian and anthropologist Joseph Tainter. He proposed that societies make investments in complexity to solve problems, and these investments yield a measurable return. The relationship between this investment and its return is not linear. It follows the classic economic curve of marginal utility. In the early stages, the returns on complexity are astronomical. Consider a simple agrarian society that develops its first irrigation system, a significant leap in organizational and technological complexity. The investment is relatively small, but the return, in the form of massive crop surpluses, population growth, and stability, is transformative. The benefit far outweighs the cost. In a modern parallel, a startup that hires its first dedicated finance department moves from chaotic accounting to strategic financial planning. The investment in that layer of bureaucratic complexity yields enormous benefits in efficiency, fundraising capability, and risk management. This initial success creates a powerful cognitive and institutional momentum. The leadership, whether of an empire or an enterprise, learns a simple, compelling lesson. Investing in structure solves problems and generates value. This lesson becomes codified as sound strategy, the unquestioned path to progress. When the next challenge emerges, an external threat, a logistical bottleneck, a new market opportunity, the playbook is already written. The logical, proven response is to add another layer of complexity. The Roman Republic, and its successor the Empire, stands as the canonical example of this dynamic. Faced with the problems of administering a rapidly expanding territory, they did not shrink from complexity. They perfected it. They developed a professional civil service, a complex legal code, standing legions organized into a clear hierarchy, and vast logistical networks of roads and aqueducts. On screen now is a schematic of the Roman provincial government under the Principate. What we see is not chaos, but a rational, ordered system designed to extract resources, maintain order, and manage a multi-ethnic empire. Each new bureau, each new tax, each new legion was a logical and often necessary response to a specific problem. For centuries, this strategy of ordained complexity was wildly successful, creating one of the most stable and prosperous political structures in human history. When we analyze the modern corporation, we see the exact same pattern of development. A company faces new compliance burdens and creates a dedicated legal department. It struggles with inconsistent branding and establishes a chief marketing office with its own hierarchy. It needs to innovate faster, so it builds an elaborate R&D structure, complete with its own budget, reporting lines, and success metrics. As this chart of a typical Fortune 500 company's organizational structure illustrates, it is a complex tapestry of interlocking departments, divisions, and teams, each one a historical artifact of a problem that was solved by adding structure. This is the ordinary world for any successful, mature system. It is a world built on the triumphs of complexity. Its stability and prosperity are direct results of its intricate design. But within this success, a critical variable is changing almost imperceptibly at first. The cost of maintaining the existing structure begins to rise, and the marginal return on adding new complexity begins to fall. The old, reliable solution is becoming less potent, and its cost is quietly compounding, hidden beneath the edifice of past success. The journey from a highly functional system to a brittle, failing one is not a sudden plunge, but a slow, inexorable slide down the backside of the marginal utility curve. The Western Roman Empire, in its final 2 centuries, provides the definitive historical case study of this process, an ordeal where the costs of complexity began to fatally overwhelm its benefits. The very mechanisms that had built the empire became the engine of its dissolution. For centuries, Rome's formula worked. It met new challenges with new layers of administration and military force, and the returns justified the investment. But by the 3rd century AD, the nature of the problems had changed. The empire faced a confluence of crises, persistent, multi-front barbarian incursions, recurrent plagues that devastated the population and labor force, and political instability that saw emperors rise and fall with stunning rapidity. Rome's response was textbook. It doubled down on complexity. This is most starkly illustrated in the reforms of Emperor Diocletian at the end of the 3rd century. Faced with an empire too vast to be governed by one man from one capital, he did the logical thing. He quadrupled the imperial bureaucracy by creating the Tetrarchy, a system of 4 co-emperors, each with their own court, staff, and military command. On screen is a map showing the division of the empire under this system. It was a brilliant, rational solution to the problem of scale. To combat inflation and fund the state, he instituted the edict on maximum prices and a comprehensive tax reform that was more invasive and systematic than anything seen before. When we analyze these actions through Tainter's framework, we see a system desperately investing in complexity to solve existential threats. Yet, it is here that we witness the catastrophic shift in the cost-benefit equation. Each of these investments carried a staggering, compounding cost. The expanded military necessary to defend the long frontiers required ever-increasing manpower and resources. The quadrupled bureaucracy of the Tetrarchy meant 4 courts to fund, for Praetorian guards to pay, and a vastly larger administrative class drawing salaries from the state. The burden of paying for this immense structure fell squarely on the agricultural backbone of the empire. On screen now are excerpts from the Theodosian Code, a collection of Roman laws from the period. What they reveal is a state desperately trying to lock down its tax base. Farmers, known as coloni, were legally tied to their land to prevent them from fleeing their tax obligations. The landowning class, the curiales, were made personally responsible for collecting the taxes in their districts, a duty so ruinous that many sought to abandon their status and property to escape it. This is the empire of diminishing returns in action. The investment in a larger army did not yield a proportional increase in security. The frontiers remained porous, and the troops were often spread too thin. The massive bureaucracy became a drag on the economy, a vast overhead that produced little tangible value beyond its own perpetuation. The crushing tax system, designed to fund these solutions, became the problem itself. It actively disincentivized production. Why would a farmer invest in improving his land when any surplus would be immediately confiscated by the tax collector? Here, we see a lethal feedback loop take hold. To meet its expenses, the state demanded more taxes from a shrinking economic base. As this graph showing estimates of Roman GDP illustrates, economic output began a steady decline after the 2nd century. When tax revenues inevitably fell short, the emperors resorted to another solution: currency debasement. On screen is a comparison of Roman coinage over time. A silver denarius from the early empire is nearly pure silver. By the mid-3rd century, it is little more than a bronze coin with a thin silver wash. The state was creating money to pay its bills, triggering rampant inflation that destroyed savings and shattered commercial trust. The system was now consuming itself. Each solution simply created a new, more intractable problem. More bureaucracy required more taxes, which depressed the economy, which required more coercive measures to extract revenue, which further increased the size and cost of the bureaucracy. This is the critical threshold Tainter identified, the point at which the benefits derived from the complex imperial structure were outweighed by the enormous cost of maintaining it. For the average inhabitant of the Western Empire, the benefits of Roman civilization, law, order, infrastructure, were increasingly abstract. The reality was a predatory tax system, economic stagnation, and a military that could no longer guarantee their safety. At this point, the collapse becomes a rational economic choice. When a local strongman or barbarian chieftain offered protection for a lower price than the imperial tax collector, allegiance shifted. The fall of Rome was not a single event in 476 AD. It was a drawn-out process of disaggregation, a rapid and systemic simplification, because the marginal cost of participating in the complex imperial system was no longer worth the benefit. The citizens, one province at a time, simply walked away from an investment that no longer provided a return. The ordeal was over because the system itself had become the primary threat to survival and prosperity. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire was not a failure of ambition or intelligence, but a failure of energy economics. The imperial system simply could no longer afford itself. This historical ledger provides not a prophecy, but a powerful diagnostic blueprint. The dynamics that governed Rome's decline are the same systemic forces that now govern the life cycle of our modern corporate leviathans. The elixir, the gift we take from this historical ordeal, is the framework itself, a method for diagnosing when an organization's complexity has become its primary liability. When we apply Tainter's model to the modern corporation, we find direct parallels for the symptoms of terminal decline. The first key indicator is the unchecked growth of administrative overhead relative to productive output. This is the corporate equivalent of Diocletian's tetrarchy. We see it in the proliferation of middle management layers, compliance departments, and internal committees whose primary function is to manage the complexity created by other internal groups. On screen now is a comparison of two corporate organizational charts from the same company, 50 years apart. While the number of frontline, value-creating employees may have only doubled, the managerial and administrative layers above them have grown exponentially. This structure becomes a self-perpetuating drag on resources, consuming capital and time that could otherwise be invested in innovation or production. The second indicator, analogous to Rome's ruinous taxes, is the rise of what we can call process friction. This is the internal tax levied on an employee's time and energy. It manifests as convoluted approval chains for minor decisions, endless status meetings, and onerous reporting requirements that divert focus from core tasks. Consider this workflow diagram for a simple project approval in a highly complex organization. The path is not linear, but a tangled web of handoffs and sign-offs. For the individual engineer, marketer, or designer, navigating this bureaucracy becomes their primary job. The cognitive load of managing the process exceeds the cognitive load of performing the actual work. Productivity stagnates not from a lack of talent, but because the system's architecture creates overwhelming drag. Third, we must look for evidence of innovation debasement, the modern parallel to currency debasement. An organization suffering from this ailment will show increasing investment in R&D while producing diminishing returns in genuine market breakthroughs. As this chart plotting R&D spending against new patent filings or market-leading products shows, the input metric rises while the output metric flatlines or declines. The bureaucracy, built to manage risk and maintain existing revenue streams, becomes inherently hostile to the disruptive and unpredictable nature of true innovation. The organization becomes excellent at producing incremental updates to existing products, but loses the capacity to create something genuinely new. Finally, the most telling indicator is the flight of human capital. In the late Roman Empire, productive citizens abandoned their land to escape the tax burden. In the modern corporation, the most talented and effective individuals begin to opt out. They leave for smaller, more agile competitors, or they become disengaged within the system itself. They recognize that the personal return on their effort is being consumed by the cost of the bureaucracy. When an organization starts losing its most productive people, not for compensation, but out of frustration with systemic inefficiency, it is a sign that the social contract is broken. The system is no longer a platform for their success, but an obstacle to it. This framework is the tool that allows you, the professional, to shift from being a passenger within a complex system to being an analyst of it. By learning to identify these indicators, you gain the ability to assess the long-term viability of your own organization and to understand the deep-seated forces that drive its behavior. This is the victory, the clarity to see the system for what it is and to navigate the uncertainty it creates. The patterns of history do not repeat, but they do rhyme with the unwavering logic of systems. The rise and fall of complexity is a cycle as old as civilization, embedded in empires and enterprises alike. By understanding this fundamental dynamic, the arc from productive investment to unsustainable cost, we gain more than historical insight. We acquire a durable intellectual framework to interpret the present and to make more resilient strategic choices for the future.